Hello students, I am Professor Dr. Adarsh Kumar. Today I bring you the next learning episode in BSc Forensic Science on an important unit of paper Forensic Anthropology. Today in this lecture you will be learning about one of the very important aspect of biological profiling, that is how to determine sex with the help of various bones. You will also be acquainted with the sexual dimorphism and its presence in ischial, mandible and pelvis. These three are the most important bones. Lastly, we will wind up this module by studying sex differentiation in juvenile skeleton, that the children below 18 years of age. Let us start our module with a look at what we are going to learn today. In module 1, we will be covering about the biological profile, the basic determination of sex. Module 2, there will be comparison of skeleton in general. Module 3 will deal with the comparison of skeleton with the help of ischial, that is male and female ischial, and module 4 will cover the comparison with the help of mandible, males and females. Module 5 will deal with the comparison of skeleton in pelvis, that is male and female pelvis, and module 6 will deal with the comparison of skeleton in juveniles. To conclusion will be the module 7. The first step in developing a biological profile is to determine sex. Sex is the biological aspect of an individual determined by genes and expressed through primary, that is for example, reproductive organs and hormones, and secondary, that is musculature, body hair etc., secondary sexual characteristics. In contrast, the gender refers to the social expression of a person's identity as it relates to their social role and behavior, when we talk about the intersex and all those. Gender is generally self defined. Societal and cultural norms may influence gender choice, but an individual may not necessarily identify themselves according to those rules. In general, anthropologists do not determine the gender of an individual, but personal effects and cultural materials may suggest a person's gender identification as well. The hormonal and visual differences that make living males and females distinct also create physiological differences between their skeletons, and this is called as sexual dimorphism. This is most obvious in the pelvic bones and the ischial. These are the two most important bones when we talk about the sexual dimorphism. The differences in the pelvis are largely the result of evolutionary and functional constraints. All humans are adapted to walking on two legs, but female must also give birth to relatively large headed babies, and these different pressures produce structural differences between males and females that can be used to tell them apart. The skull also displays a degree of sexual dimorphism. Overall, males tend to have a larger skull than females. They also have an average greater muscle development and more rugged muscle attachments. These differences in size and robusticity can help determine whether an individual is male or female. The differences in size and robusticity may also be evident in other elements. If the skull and pelvis are not available, measurements of other bones may help determine if an individual is male or female. However, investigators must be very cautious as there is considerable overlap between males and females. Now, let us see how the comparison of the skeleton in general, how the males and females skeleton. In the normal living and still fleshed dead, sex is a discrete variable. One is clearly either male or female. Differences between the sexes are much less distinct in the skeleton, where both morphologic and metric manifestations overlap to form a continuum. There is, for example, no absolute size above which all are male and below which all are female. Again, if the adult skeleton is complete or at least has an intact pelvis, sex can usually be determined up to a accuracy of say 95 to 98%. Primary sexual characteristics, for example, external genitalia are present in the soft tissue even before birth, but no such definitive marker has yet been observed in the skeleton. Although sex differences have been quantified in immature skeletons, they remain subtle until secondary sex characteristics begin developing during adolescence phase. Attempts at sexing prepubescent bones have been made by using measurements of growth based differences between males and females, but the results are far from definitive. Now, we will understand the difference between male and female skeleton with the help of this table. If we talk about the general size of male skeleton, they are larger and more massive, whereas in females their general size is smaller and slender. We take the long bones, the males have got ridges, depression and processes are more prominent. Bones of arms and legs are 8% longer, whereas in females they are less prominent. If we talk about the shaft of the bones, they are more rough in case of males, whereas in case of females they are smoother, thinner with relatively wider medullary cavity. If you just observe the articular surfaces of various bones, in case of males they will be larger, whereas in case of females they will be smaller. Take the metacarpal bones, they will be longer and broader in males, and whereas they will be shorter and narrower in females. If you just take the weight of the whole skeleton, the males weigh roughly 4.5 kgs, whereas the females weigh around 3 kgs, 2.75 to 3 kgs. Sexual dimorphism as seen in the human skeleton is determined by the hormones that are produced by the body. There are numerous markers on a human skeleton which can provide archaeologists and anthropologists with an estimate sex of the deceased. The areas of the skeleton remains that are studied most frequently are the skull, dentition, the pelvis bones and the DNA studies. The two most commonly used skeleton markers that are observed by osteologists are the skull and pelvic bones, as these show the most extreme differences. It is generally noted that female skeleton elements are characterized by being smaller in size and lighter in constructions, where males have larger robust elements, as I already told you. Yet it is always important to observe a variety of skeletal markers to come to an accurate determination. It should be noted that it is a lot harder to reliably deduce a juvenile sex, as many of the differences in skeletal markers only become visible after maturation, when the skeletal changes occur due to puberty. Therefore, use of DNA has been widely used to sex sub-adult skeletal remains, as DNA analysis can now detect and identify X and Y chromosome specific sequences. These differences become discernible at puberty, when the skull develops features that reflect sites of increased muscle attachment, whereas the female skull tends to retain its more pedomorphic features. In the male, the glabella, the supraorbital ridges, the mastoid processes and the nuchal and the malar areas, they become more prominent in contrast to female, whereas where all these features are smaller and the forehead remains vertical with more pronounced frontal as well as parietal eminences. The orbits are more rounded in the females, they have got a sharper margins and are larger relative to the upper facial skeleton. The male mandible, this is the jawbone, jawbone, this generally has a more prominent chin region, a more robust lower border, a greater body weight and more prominent muscular markings. The angle formed between the body and the ramus, this is the body, this is the ramus, is more acute in male than in the females. This figure, this depicts how the male skull shows the well developed supraorbital ridging, the mastoid processes and the external occipital protuberance. The mandible is robust and the chin region is pronounced. One of the most widely used method of sexing skeletal remains is by examining the skull, because this is the most commonly found bone during process of excavation or whenever the bony remains are found. The skull has got 5 different features that are observed and scored. These 5 features can be scored. These are nuchal crest, the mastoid process, the supraorbital margin, the supraorbital ridge and the mental eminence. This figure depicts all those. Each of these markers is given a numerical score from 1 to 5 relating to the level of expression, with 1 being the minimal expression and 5 being the maximal expression. Each feature should be scored independently and without any influence from other identifying features. It has been generally found that female skulls are more likely to have a lower level of expression in all the features, whereas the male skulls are more likely to have higher levels of expression. To observe the nuchal crest, one should view the skull from its lateral profile and feel for the smoothness. 1 again is given to the minimal expression, or ruggedness is the maximum, that is given as number 5, the maximal expression of the occipital surface, and compare it with the scoring system of that feature. This is depicted in the figure 3. The scoring system for expression levels in the nuchal crest is dealt in the figure 3. To observe the mastoid process, one should view the skull from its lateral profile and compare its size and volume, not its length, with other features of the skull such as the zygomatic process of the temporal bone and the external auditory meatus. Visually compare its size with the scoring system of that feature, which is explained in the figure 4. The mastoid process only descends or projects only a small distance, then it should be scored a 1, that is the minimal expression, whereas if it is several times the width and length of the external auditory meatus, this is the external auditory meatus and this is the mastoid process, then it should be scored as 5, that is the maximal expression. The figure 4 deals with the scoring system for the expression levels of the mastoid process. To observe the supraorbital margins, one should view the skull at its again from the lateral profile and place their finger against the margin of the orbit and hold the edge to determine its thickness. If the edge feels extremely sharp, then it would score a 1, that is a minimal expression. If it is felt rounded and thick as a pencil, it should be score a 5, that is the maximal expression. The figure 5 deals with the scoring system for the expression levels of the supraorbital margins. To observe the supraorbital ridge, one should view the skull from its profile and view the prominence of the supraorbital ridge. If the ridge is smooth with little or no projection, then it would score a 1, minimal expression. If it is pronounced and forms a rounded loop shaped ridge, then would score a 5, that is the maximal expression. The figure 6 depicts this phenomena, the scoring system for the expression level of the supraorbital ridges. Now, the following table deals with the comparison of male and female skull. How when by comparing various features we can differentiate between male and female skull. When we talk about the male and female skulls, the general appearance, as I told you earlier also, the male's skull are larger and longer, whereas the female skulls are smaller, lighter and their walls are thin, relatively thinner. We talk about the cranial capacity. The males have got a capacity of around 1500 to 1550 cc, whereas females have got a cranial capacity of 1350 to 1400 cc. If we see the architecture of male skull, they are rugged, muscle ridges are more marked, especially in the occipital and temporal areas, whereas they are smooth in case of females. If we see the forehead steeper, the forehead is steeper and less rounded, whereas in females it is vertical, rounded and full. The glabella is more prominent in males, whereas it is small or absent in female skulls. The frontonasal junction is very distinct in case of males, whereas it is smoothly curved in case of females. If you see, look at the orbits are square, set lower on the face, relatively smaller and have rounded margins in case of males, whereas in female skulls the orbits are rounded higher, relatively larger and have got a sharper margins. The supraorbital ridges are prominent in case of males, whereas they are absent or less prominent in case of female skulls. The cheekbones in case of male skulls are heavier and laterally arched, whereas in case of female skull they are lighter and more compressed. The zygomatic arch is more prominent in case of males, whereas it is less prominent in case of females. The nasal aperture is higher and narrower with sharp margins in case of males, whereas it is lower and broader in case of females. The external auditory meatus in case of male skulls, the bony ridge along the upper border is prominent, whereas it is often absent in case of females. The frontal eminences and parietal eminences are small in case of males, whereas they are larger in case of females. The frontal sinuses are much developed in males, whereas they are less developed in females. The occipital area, the muscle lines, if you observe the occipital area, the muscle lines and protuberance are prominent in case of males, where they are not prominent in case of female skulls. If you observe the mastoid process in case of male, they will be medium to large size, round in shape and blunt, whereas in case of female skulls, they will be small to medium, smooth and pointed. The base of the skull, if we see, sides of the muscular insertions are more marked, that is a general feature, whereas in males, whereas it is less marked in case of females. The digastric groove is more deep in case of male skulls, whereas it is shallower in case of female skulls. Condylar facets are long and slender in case of male skulls, whereas they are shorter and broader in case of female skulls. The occipital condyles are large in male skull and small in female skulls. The palate is larger, broader and tends more to be a U shaped in case of males, whereas in females skulls it is smaller, tends more to be parabolic shape. I am talking about the shape of palate. The foramina, if you observe, the male skulls have got a larger foramina, whereas female skulls have smaller foramina. If we see the biggest foramina of the skull, that is the foramen magnum, it is relatively large and long in case of male skulls, whereas in case of female skulls they are relatively small and round. And teeth in general are larger in case of males, whereas they are smaller in case of females. To observe the mental eminence, one should view the skull front facing and hold the mandible between the thumb and index finger like this, with the thumb placed either side of the mental eminence. If there is little or no projection of the mental eminence, then it would score a 1, that is the minimal expression. If it is pronounced, it would score a 5, that is the maximal expression. The figure 7 depicts in detail the scoring system for the expression levels of the mental eminence. Now, we will understand the difference between male and female mandible with the help of following table. Generally, the male mandibles are larger and thicker in size, whereas female mandibles are smaller and thinner in size. If you observe the chin, it is square shaped in case of males, whereas it is rounded in case of females. If you see the body height of the mandible, that is the jawbone, the symphysis is at greater level, whereas The symphysis menti is smaller in case of females. If you observe the ascending ramus, it has got a greater breadth in case of male mandible, whereas it has got a smaller breadth in case of female mandibles. If you observe the angle of body and ramus, in male mandibles it will be less obtuse, that it will be less than 125 degrees, prominent and everted, that means outwards, whereas in case of female mandibles it will be more obtuse and not prominent. If you observe the condyles, they will be larger in case of male mandibles, whereas they will be smaller in case of female mandibles. The mental tubercle is large and prominent in case of male mandibles, whereas this is insignificant in case of female mandibles. Which is the most important bone of whole human body when we talk about the sexual dimorphism or the sex differentiation. Because methods for age and stature estimation are sex dependent, sex determination is usually the first step of the biological identification process, as already told you. This reliability of sex determination depends on the completeness of the remains and the degree of sexual dimorphism inherent in the population from which the individual originates. In general, there are two main morphological difference between male and female skeletons. Male bones are generally larger and more robust than female bones due to the attachment of a larger and thus more powerful muscle mass, larger body size and a period of delayed pubertal growth compared to the female. Now, second parameter where we are concerned in this particular module is that the male pelvis is primarily adapted to a bipedal striding gait, whereas the size and shape differences of the female reflect the biomechanical compromise between efficient walking and the modifications necessary for the passage of a large fetal head through the pelvic canal. It is generally accepted that the two most sexually dimorphic elements of the skeleton are the pelvis and of course, the first one, the other one is the skull, which I already dealt in detail. Many workers claim an accuracy of sex prediction in the range of 90% from the pelvis alone and 80% from the skull alone. However, these values are optimal and they will be lower if the bones are damaged or indeed if the individual originates from a populations with low levels of sexual dimorphism. Generally, the shape of the male pelvis is high and narrow, whereas that of the female is wider and shallower with relatively and often absolutely larger inlet and outlet dimensions. These differences are most obviously reflected posteriorly in the shape of the greater sciatic notch and the relative portions of the body and ala of the sacrum and anteriorly in the subpubic angle and the shape of the pubic bone. A wide shallow greater sciatic notch is considered to be a female characteristic, as is the greater width of the ala of the sacrum compared to the width of its body. Probably the element of the skeleton that can offer the most reliable indication of sex is the pubic bone. Owing to its thin covering of compact bone and its ventral position in many burials, it is unfortunately one of the parts of the skeleton to survive inhumation least successfully. So, most of the times what we found, it is damaged. Although the morphological determination of sex is the preferred method of analysis by the expert, as it permits a multifaceted accumulation of information, it is not sufficiently statistically robust to satisfy judicial requirements. Now, to explain this phenomena, this figure 1, this deals with the depiction of both male and female skulls. In figure 1, you can see the wider female greater sciatic notch is on the left and the narrower and more hooked male morphology is on the right side. the figure 2 deals with the more square shaped female pubic bone resulting in a wider subpubic angle, that is on the left side, and the more triangular male pubic bone is on the right side. Now, we will understand the difference between male and female pelvis with the help of following tables. If you observe the bony framework of this pelvis, in males it is massive, rougher, marked muscle sides and stand higher and more erect in the body, whereas in females the bony framework is less massive, slender and smoother. Generally, the shape of the male pelvis is deep funnel shaped in case of males, whereas it is flat bowl shaped in case of females. If we observe the ilium, it is less vertical, curve of iliac crest reaches higher level and is more prominent in case of male pelvis, whereas in female pelvis the ilium is more vertical, distance between iliac crest is less, iliac fossa shallow and the curves of the crest are well marked. If you observe the preauricular sulcus, that is the attachment of anterior sacroiliac ligament, obviously in case of males it is not frequent or narrow or shallow, whereas it is more frequent, broad and deep in multipara, that means the lady who has delivered number of babies. If we observe the acetabulum, it will be large, having a diameter of 52 millimeters and directed laterally in male pelvis, whereas it is small, having a diameter of 46 millimeters and directed somewhat anterolaterally in female pelvis. If you observe the obturator foramen, it is large, often oval shaped with base upwards in case of male pelvis, whereas it is small, triangular with apex forwards in case of female pelvis. If you observe the greater sciatic notch, that is the most important parameter, as I told you earlier, the smaller, it is smaller, narrower and deeper in male pelvis, whereas it is larger, wider and shallower in female pelvis. The iliopectineal line is well marked and rough in case of male pelvis, whereas it is rounded and smooth in case of female pelvis. The ischial tuberosity, it is inverted in case of male pelvis, whereas it is everted and more widely separated in case of female pelvis. If you observe the body of the pubis, it is narrow and triangular in male pelvis, whereas it is broad, square and pits on the posterior surface in case of female pelvis, especially in case of a multipara. The ramus of pubis, it is likely the continuation of the body of pubis in case of male pelvis, whereas in female pelvis the ramus has got a constricted or narrowed appearance and is short and thick. If we see the ischiopubic rami, it is more everted in case of male pelvis, whereas it is less everted in case of female pelvis. Now, if we see the symphysis, the pubic symphysis, it is high in case of male pelvis, whereas in case of female pelvis it is low and distance between two pubic tubercles is greater. If we further observe, the dorsal border is irregular and shows depressions or pits which are occurred as an after result of scars of parturition during the childbirth. We observe the subpubic angle, it is V shaped sharp angle having a angulation of 70 to 75 degrees in case of male pelvis, whereas in females it is U shaped, rounded, broader and maybe the angle is maybe 90 to 100 degrees or even more. If we observe the pelvic brim or the pelvic inlet, it is heart shaped in case of male pelvis, whereas it is circular or elliptical and more spacious with longer diameter in case of female pelvis. If we observe the pelvic cavity, it is conical and funnel shaped in case of male pelvis, whereas it is broad and rounded in case of female pelvis. If we see the pelvic outlet, it is smaller in case of male pelvis, whereas it is larger in case of female pelvis. If we see the sacroiliac articulation, it is large, extends to 2.5 to 3rd vertebrae in case of male pelvis, whereas in female pelvis the sacroiliac articulation is small, oblique and extends to 2 to 2.5 vertebra, which helps in the process of parturition. or childbirth to have a mobile sacroiliac articulation. If we observe the sacroiliac joint, it is large and less sharply angulated in case of male pelvis, whereas in females pelvis the sacroiliac joint is L shaped and elevated anteriorly. The part of the pelvis comprises of sacrum also. We observe the sacrum alone, it in males it is longer, narrower with more evenly distributed curvatures. Sacral promontory is well marked and the body of the first sacral vertebra is larger in case of male pelvis, whereas in female pelvis the sacrum is shorter, wider, upper half is almost straight, curved forward in the lower half, promontory less marked and the body of first sacral vertebra is small in case of female pelvis. The coccyx is less movable in male pelvis, where it is more movable in female pelvis. If you see the ischiopubic index, that is the most important parameter when we talk about the metric measurements. In case of males, the range of the ischiopubic index is the 73 to 94 and in case of females the range is 91 to 115. The ischiopubic index is the length of pubis divided by length of ischium into 100. The sciatic notch index is 4 to 5 in case of male pelvis, whereas in case of female pelvis or the better it should say the females, it will be 5 to 6, the sciatic notch index. As in the adult, observations on sexual dimorphism have tended to be concentrate on the pelvis and skull. Some researchers claim an accuracy of between 70 to 80% for certain measurements of the ilium and femur, but these figures have failed to be confirmed on retesting. The famous author the Shituowski in 1987 claims that the morphological differences in the surface of the sacroiliac joint could separate males from females have proved to be of limited use when we talk about sexing, as confirmed by the several other authors. Some traits of the orbit and mandible show dimorphism if used under carefully controlled conditions, but remain to be tested further on a population of known sex. At the present time, however, it has to be concluded that the juvenile skeletal cannot be sexed with any degree of reliability from morphological observations alone. Although some slight sexual dimorphism may exist from an early age, it does not reach a high enough level to permit accurate sexing until pubertal modifications have taken place. Some of the issues pertaining to sex determination from both adult and juvenile skeleton remains have been addressed with some success following technological advances that facilitate the isolation and amplification of DNA from bones and teeth. The amylogenin gene responsible for the production of one of the organic components of the enamel of teeth has sex sequence difference on the X and Y chromosomes, and a method utilizing molecular genetic techniques correctly identified 19 out of 20 skeletons of a known sex. At the present time, there are still problems with contamination and degradation of DNA obtained from both bones as well as teeth, especially in certain burial conditions. So, however, with the improvement of current techniques and the development of new methods, sex typing from the genetic material could in future become routine in forensic cases also in cases of juvenile skeletons. The first step in developing a biological profile is to determine sex. Sex is the biological aspect of an individual determined by genes and expressed through primary and secondary sexual characteristics. In contrast, the gender refers to the social expression of a person's identity as it relates to their social role and behavior. The hormonal and visual differences that make living males and females distinct also create physiological differences between their skeletons. This sexual dimorphism is most obvious in the pelvic bones and the skull. Many workers claim an accuracy of sex prediction in the region of 90% from the pelvis alone and 80% from the skull alone, while combined accuracy may be up to 95 to 98%. The female skeleton elements are characterized by being smaller in size and lighter in construction, whereas males have larger robust elements. Male skull shows well developed supraorbital ridging, mastoid process and external occipital protuberance. The mandible is robust and the chin region is pronounced in case of males. In pelvis, if we observe the changes, the greater sciatic notch in females is wider, whereas it is narrower and more hooked in females. Subpubic angle is V shaped with a sharp angle of 75 to 70% in males, whereas it is U shaped rounded with broader angle of 90 to 100 degrees in case of females. Juvenile skeleton cannot be sexed with any degree of reliability from morphological observations alone. Sex typing from genetic material with the help of DNA and the amelogenin from the animal in future may be of use. With all these information, here we come to the end of today's lecture. Do keep in mind what we discussed today. I will be back with one more lecture in this series. If you want to learn more and enhance your knowledge, you may log on to our website www.cec.nic.in for MCQ, quizzes, LORs, etc. Thank you for your time today. I will see you in the next lecture. Have a great day.